Hello and welcome to Sovereign Moves. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for the latest insights.
Today, we are tearing into a highly sensitive, high-stakes intelligence explainer. We're looking at the geopolitical chessboard of the current U.S.-Iran ceasefire. Listen, what you're hearing on the evening news? That's just the surface. Today, we measure that surface against the cold, hard depth of reality.
We've got a structured 5-part briefing to get through today. First, we'll dissect the May 2 illusion. Second, we uncover Operation Great Dig. Third, we break down the Dark Eagle specifications. Fourth, we expose the Russian co-pilot. And finally, we map out the tactical endgame. These are the moves and the counter-moves. Let's get to work.
Section 1. The May 2 illusion. The diplomatic surface. We need to establish the official narrative coming out of Washington right now, just so we can dismantle it. On May 2nd, President Donald Trump sent a letter directly to the U.S. Congress. It stated, "The hostilities that began on February 28, 2026 have terminated." Now, the timing here is absolutely critical. This declaration was delivered exactly as the 60-day war powers deadline expired. By legally declaring that hostilities are terminated, the administration effectively bypassed the need for immediate congressional authorization, allowing them to maintain a military posture in a theater that, quite frankly, remains undeniably hot. Because there is a massive, gaping hole between this diplomatic illusion and the stark military reality on the ground. The official political stance is that the ceasefire is holding, but the ground reality, it proves this is nothing more than a frantic, tactical pause. Both sides are aggressively using this tiny window to regroup, rearm, and shift high-value assets into position for what comes next. And what comes next is a far more lethal phase of combat.
That brings us to Section 2, Operation Great Dig, the underground reality. Let's look at what satellite intelligence is actually verifying.
11,000. That is the exact number of targets the Pentagon pounded across Iran in just the first 5 weeks of the war. To pull that off, U.S. and allied forces dropped over 13,000 munitions. They were deliberately going after missile storage, defense production, and the access tunnels leading to Iran's most fortified bases.
But we have a glaring intelligence discrepancy here. On one side, President Trump is claiming that 80% of Iran's missile-making facilities have been successfully wiped out. On the other side, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is stating that Iran still retains roughly 50% of its ballistic missile stockpile. So the obvious question is, how on earth did Iran manage to preserve half of its arsenal under that kind of relentless bombardment?
The answer is calculated excavation, and we have the receipts. Satellite imagery from April 10 captures exactly what's happening. At a missile base near Khomeini, specifically at coordinates 33.64 degrees north, 50.07 degrees east, we tracked a front-end loader actively clearing out a blocked tunnel. On that exact same day, heavy machinery was documented excavating a completely sealed missile base near Tabriz. They are systematically digging out thousands of missiles that we previously classified as either trapped or totally destroyed.
The fundamental reality of this theater is that Iran's missile cities were literally engineered to absorb that initial kinetic shock. We're talking about facilities buried up to 500 meters deep inside incredibly dense mountain rock. Standard U.S. munitions, even the massive JBU-57 bunker busters, they just cannot penetrate that kind of depth. Sure, the airstrikes collapsed the entrances, but the actual assets inside, they survived. And right now, the excavation is underway.
Moving to Section 3, Dark Eagle specifications. The U.S. countermove. Since traditional bunker busters are basically obsolete against these depths, the strategy has to evolve.
Enter the long-range hypersonic weapon, the Dark Eagle. Now, standard public estimates cap its range at around 1,725 miles, but our updated intelligence places its true strike capability much higher, right at 2,175 miles, traveling at speeds well over Mach 5. The U.S. Central Command is pushing hard to deploy this asset to the Middle East for the very first time. And keep in mind, we're looking at an operational cost of roughly $15 million for every single missile. What actually makes the Dark Eagle the ultimate countermeasure here is kinetic impact. It doesn't just rely on massive explosive warheads. The sheer, devastating force of a hypersonic vehicle slamming into a target at Mach 5 is enough to obliterate deeply buried, highly defended bunkers. It is a decapitation weapon, explicitly designed to punch through the solid rock layers that traditional weapons can't even scratch. But it is an incredibly rare asset. Just contrast the raw numbers for a second.
The U.S. has already fired around 1,100 standard JASSM-ER cruise missiles. On the flip side, a single Dark Eagle battery only holds 8 missiles, and the whole setup carries an estimated price tag of $2.7 billion per battery. So if the Dark Eagle gets unleashed, you can bet its deployment will be strictly reserved for only the absolute highest value underground targets.
Section 4. The Russian Co-Pilot, Eurasia's Technological Shield. Because Iran is not conducting this war in a vacuum, they are operating with a silent, highly advanced partner.
And that partnership is anchored right in orbit. Meet the Kayam. It's a Russian-built Canopus V-Spy satellite that went up in 2022. So, while Russian infantry obviously aren't deployed on the ground, Russian intelligence architecture has essentially become the eyes for Iranian missile batteries.
This satellite is feeding them imagery with a 1.2-meter resolution. That is serious high-grade orbital reconnaissance. It literally allows Tehran to track U.S. naval carrier movements in the Persian Gulf via live feeds. It's giving them a level of precision targeting that Iranian forces could never, ever achieve on their own.
And it certainly doesn't stop at satellites. What we're looking at is a tightly integrated web of foreign tech. We've got 48 Russian Su-35 fighter jets equipped with advanced electronic warfare pods. You have S-400 air defense systems blanketing the airspace. You have China's Beidou-3 navigation system replacing U.S. GPS with jam-resistant targeting. And you've got Chinese YLC-8B anti-stealth radars. This is Eurasia's technological shield, and it is actively deployed to neutralize American stealth superiority.
Meanwhile, safely operating underneath that shield, Iran is just churning out highly cost-effective, low-observable weapons. Look at their new UAV swarm capabilities. You've got the Hadid-110. It's a jet-powered, stealth-shaped drone hitting 500 kilometers an hour, and it costs under $30,000 to make. Then there's the Shahed-101. It uses an electric motor to drastically slash its heat signature, hits a 1,500-kilometer range, and costs less than $10,000. They are manufactured to be launched in endless waves, specifically designed to overwhelm and exhaust U.S. and allied air defenses.
Finally, Section 5, the Tactical Endgame. A fragile pause. The pieces are locked in position on the board. Now, we absolutely must account for the damage that has already been sustained. Despite all this strategic rearming, the U.S.-led coalition has severely degraded Iran's infrastructure. All 9 of Iran's strategic ballistic missile bases in the south, and that includes crucial staging sites in Shiraz and Hajiabad, have taken heavy, precision strikes. The surface infrastructure is highly compromised.
But that illusion of peace, it is shattering as we speak. We are currently sitting inside a critical 72-hour window. The fragile ceasefire has expired. Iran is maintaining a strict blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, deliberately choking off global energy routes. Over at sea, the U.S. Navy is actively prepping the USS Zumwalt for its first-ever deployment of hypersonic missiles. And concurrently, Iranian commanders are out there publicly threatening to deploy an undisclosed mystery weapon. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. What happens when this 72-hour window closes? If the Dark Eagle flies, those 500-meter-deep underground cities are going to rapidly become tombs. But if Iran's Russian-backed shield holds, the U.S. is going to be facing an exhausted air defense network and a locked maritime choke point. The moves are being made. Are you watching the right ones? Stay sovereign. Join us. We are only 953 thinkers away from our next major milestone. Subscribe now to see the moves they are burying in the bunkers.